Hello gems and welcome back to the Syafire Star. Today we're going to be learning about the Animator in Live2D Cubism. It's super powerful whether you want to animate your character for a game you're planning on making. If you're planning on making a little animation or episodes with your character, this would be a lovely tool to make. This episode is just going to cover the basics of what the Animator is, and in the next episode is when we'll really dive into how to use the Animator and actually create animations together. So let's learn the basics in this video. Step 1 will be to switch to animation mode. So if you have your model open, the one we've been working on for the series, you'll go up to the categories up here and switch to animation. This will bring you into an animation mode. This is an animation I did previously that's here, so in order to make a new animation, you'll want to do this for each new animation you create. We'll go to File, New, and instead of model, this time we'll create animation. Now there's several different ways you can create your animation depending on the purpose. So for Unity, this might be if you were making a video game. SDK is more standalone or in the other category. There's also a video if you're doing something like an episode or a movie or a maybe like starting soon screen. And then there's After Effects, which is Adobe After Effects. There is a plugin to work with Live2D. If you have knowledge in how to use After Effects and Live2D together, that's a really powerful combo as well for doing things like animated music videos or again, something like a starting soon Twitch screen. There's lots of different ways to do all of these things. We're gonna choose SDK for now, but if you wanna change your mind later, you absolutely can, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's click OK on SDK. Now we're gonna take a look over in the inspector. First we can name our scene. I'm just gonna call this test scene. Next, we want to change the width of the animation to the same size as our model or whatever output we want. So of course if you're doing a movie, the general size would be 1080 by 1920 pixels wide for a movie screen, but since we're doing one to the VTuber specifically, we want it to be the same canvas size that she's on. So let's go ahead and check what her canvas size is by going up to File, Canvas Settings, and then you'll write down maybe on a sticky note near you 1000 by 2000 or whatever your size is. Next we'll navigate back to our scene and unlock the fixed aspect ratio unless you want it to stay fixed, but ours is not. So we'll type in 1000. This is where you will plug in your canvas data by 2000. And now it should be the same size as my model. And down here would be how long do we want the animation to be total, and then of course our frame rate. Now let's talk a little bit about frame rate, or also known as FPS. Typically, we'll see 16 to 24 frames per second when it comes to animation. The larger the FPS, so the bigger / higher the number, the smoother the animation. Each medium will have a different FPS. For example, games commonly like to use 60 frames per second. Most games don't use 30 FPS anymore, so we'll change ours to 60. And of course, if you're doing an animation for a movie, you're gonna have different parameters there, so make sure to do your research on what kind of frames per second is common for the use case of your animation. For our purpose, we're just gonna change this to 60. Down here is where you can change what I showed you earlier, where we selected if it was gonna be for Unity, for video, for After Effects. This is where you can change that. Next, we'll move over to our parameters in our timeline, which is what we're going to set up next. Here's our test scene up here. You'll want to navigate to wherever your model is saved to find the CM03 file. If you don't know where that is, you can go back to your model and just click Save As and click Open in Explorer. And this should open your folder where your model is saved. Mine is going to be, I have so many versions, is going to be this one right here. And then I'll go back to my test scene. We can just cancel out of the save. And then we'll just go ahead and click and drag and drop in my model. Make sure it is the CM03 file. We'll drop that in. And next we can click this little drop down arrow. And there are some basic parameters that Live2D comes with where you can change like the scale, the opacity, rotate your model. But of course for the most control, that would be very basic. We would want to use our own parameters that we set up. If you add new parameters back to your original file later, say you decide to add like a hat or something and you start moving the hat around and you have parameters for that, and once you save the model, it should update the animation file automatically. If not, you would just repeat the same process that we did where we dragged the CM03 file into Live2D. Okay, so let's talk about keyframes. Right here is something called our timeline. This is the timer, so this would be 7 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds in. So say we want the eye to open and close, we will move our little playhead piece here and click on the dot for it to be closed, and then maybe at 24 seconds we have it open. So I'm just clicking. Now when we drag it back and forth, you can see it opening and closing. I'll do the same thing for the eye right, and we'll move the playhead here and then snap that in. So now the eyes are opening and closing, and if we click play over here, which is where you can pause and play, you can see her eyes opening. And maybe we wanted to do a little bit of a mouth smile. So maybe she starts with her mouth closed like this, and then we'll move it back here, and we want the mouth to be open and smiling by the time it gets here. So now when we click play, now she's smiling. So there's very simply how this would work. And another piece to look at is the graph editor. You can switch back and forth between the two modes by clicking on this button here. So if we go to the graph editor, this could be really nice because you can get very smooth animation. There's different types you can use. This is one that's straight, so if you want it to be just very direct and straight and to the point. And you can also select and change this to smooth, which is going to give you a lot smoother of a look. So you can see how much smoother that looks compared to something like the straight one. It looks a little bit more rigid, I would say. And then another one that's really helpful, these two are a little bit more, have a straight drop off. They're very jarring. I guess this would maybe work for like one of those puppets where the mouth opens. Maybe it depends on the look you're going for, but you don't use these quite as often. And then we have the one that's far on the right here. This is the Bezier, and the Bezier gives you these little handles where you can make it smoother. So if you want it to be smoother, you can mess with that. So this is all stuff you'll want to mess with on your own to see how it looks depending on what you're going for. There's a book I highly recommend called the Animator Survival Toolkit. If you're just getting into animation, that would be a really great one to pick up for 2D animation, for any animation that you're doing. It's a really great book. And here's one that I made pretty quickly that was just kind of a cute, like, yay! And I'll be showing you how to do this in the next episode. But if you want to save your progress, or say you just followed along with what I did right now, let's talk a little bit about that. So we'll go up to File, and there's two ways you can go. You can export for runtime as a motion file. This would help with external programs like VTube Studio. And up here is exporting this. Say you want to show off the new animation you did to your friend in Discord. So you made a GIF animation. You can export your image as a GIF animation to get a GIF, a still image sequence, or a video. I personally really like GIFs, so I did this little GIF here to be able to send to my friends. The FPS will be a little bit lower for this because GIFs naturally have a smaller FPS to save space, but that's pretty cool and something that you can show off. Next, we'll be diving even deeper on how to make animations. I'll do a little bit more of a deeper walkthrough on how to make an animation specifically. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about the Animator, and I will see you next time on the Syafire Star for yet another Live2D lesson. Bye!